Good morning, beloved. As you open your eyes to this new day, before you reach for your phone, before you check your messages, before you rush into the chaos of your schedule, I want you to pause right here with me. Because what I'm about to share with you could completely transform not just your morning, but your entire life. You see, there's a prayer that has the power to unlock miracles in ways you've never experienced before. A prayer so powerful that it can shift the atmosphere around you, align divine favor in your direction, and invite supernatural breakthrough into the most ordinary moments of your day. But here's what most people don't realize. This isn't just any prayer. This is the prayer that changes everything when you make it your very first act of each new morning. I know what some of you might be thinking. You've tried prayer before. You've whispered desperate words in your darkest moments. You've asked, you've pleaded, you've hoped. But what if I told you that the timing of your prayer, the very moment you choose to speak to heaven, holds the key to unlocking a dimension of God's power that most believers never tap into? Let me paint you a picture. Imagine waking up every single morning knowing that before your feet hit the floor, you've already positioned yourself in the center of God's will for that day. Picture starting each sunrise with the absolute certainty that heaven is paying attention, that divine intervention is already in motion, and that miraculous possibilities are being set into place before you even brush your teeth. This isn't wishful thinking. This is an biblical principle that has transformed millions of lives across centuries. And today, I'm going to show you exactly positive psychology dressed up in spiritual language. This is a how to activate it in your own daily routine. But before we dive deep into this life-changing prayer, let me share something with you that might surprise you. The most powerful prayer warriors in history, the men and women who moved mountains and witnessed the impossible, they all had one thing in common. They didn't just pray when they needed something. They didn't just cry out when life got difficult. No. They understood something that changed their entire relationship with the divine. They discovered that the very first moments of their day held a spiritual authority that could reshape everything that followed. King David, the man after God's own heart, wrote these words, "In the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I lay my requests before you and wait expectantly." Notice that phrase. In the morning, not in the evening when he was exhausted, not in the afternoon when problems arose. In the morning, when his heart was fresh, when his spirit was clear, when his faith was at its strongest. And here's what's absolutely incredible about this principle. When you pray first, before anything else touches your consciousness, before the world's noise drowns out heaven's whisper, something supernatural happens. You're not just saying words into the air, you're actually repositioning yourself in the spiritual realm. You're aligning your day with divine purpose. You're inviting God to be not just a part of your morning routine, but the architect of your entire day. But let's get specific here, because I want you to understand exactly what this prayer accomplishes. When you make this prayer your first priority, you're doing something that most people never realize is possible. You're actually partnering with heaven to write the script of your day before life writes it for you. Instead of reacting to whatever chaos comes your way, you're proactively inviting divine order. Instead of hoping for the best, you're positioning yourself for miraculous intervention. Think about it this way. Every single day you wake up to a blank canvas. 24 fresh hours stretching out before you, full of infinite possibilities. But here's what most people do. They grab their phone, check their notifications, scroll through social media, read the news, and within the first 10 minutes, they've allowed other people's agendas, other people's problems, and other people's priorities to paint the first strokes on their daily canvas. But what if instead, what if the very first thing you did was hand that paintbrush to the creator of the universe? What if you started each day by saying, "God, this day belongs to you. These 24 hours are yours to orchestrate. I'm not going to stumble through this day hoping things work out. I'm going to walk through this day knowing that you've already prepared good things for me to discover." Now, I want to address something that might be running through your mind right now. Maybe you've tried morning prayer before. Maybe you've set your alarm 15 minutes earlier, knelt by your bed and recited the same requests you always make. And maybe you didn't see the miraculous results you were hoping for. Maybe you're wondering if this is just another spiritual technique that sounds good in theory but doesn't work in real life. Here's what I want you to understand. The prayer I'm about to teach you isn't about the length of your words. It's not about the volume of your voice. It's not about the eloquence of your language or the perfection of your posture. This prayer works because it's rooted in a spiritual law that governs how heaven interacts with earth. When you align yourself with this law, when you position yourself according to this principle, miracles become not just possible, but inevitable. And I need you to catch this next part, because it's crucial. The word miracle has become so overused in our culture that we've almost forgotten what it really means. A miracle isn't just something big and dramatic that makes headlines. A miracle is any time heaven's reality breaks into earth's limitations. A miracle is any moment when God's possibilities override your circumstances. A miracle is any instance when divine favor shows up in your ordinary, everyday life. So when I tell you that this prayer can invite miracles into your day, I'm talking about the miracle of divine appointments that seem like coincidences. The miracle of doors opening that you never even knocked on. The miracle of provision appearing exactly when you need it. The miracle of peace in the middle of chaos. The miracle of wisdom when you're facing impossible decisions. The miracle of strength when you feel completely depleted. These aren't rare, once-in-a-lifetime events that only happen to super-spiritual people. These are the normal Christian life experiences that become available to anyone who learns to position themselves correctly at the beginning of each day. But here's where it gets really interesting. This prayer doesn't just change your circumstances. It changes you. When you make this prayer your daily first priority, something begins to shift in your spiritual sensitivity. You start noticing things you used to miss. You begin recognizing God's hand in situations where you used to see only randomness. Your faith doesn't just grow stronger, it grows more expectant. You don't just hope for good things to happen, you actually anticipate them. And the beautiful thing is, this anticipation isn't based on wishful thinking or positive mental attitude. It's based on a growing awareness that you serve a God who delights in blessing his children, who takes pleasure in opening doors, who finds joy in providing exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. Now, I want to share with you the science behind why praying first thing in the morning is so spiritually powerful. Your mind, when you first wake up, is in what researchers call the alpha state. This is when your brain waves are most receptive, when your subconscious is most open to input, when your spirit is most sensitive to divine communication. In this state, your prayers don't just bounce off the ceiling. They penetrate deep into your consciousness and create what I call faith imprints that influence how you perceive and respond to everything that happens throughout your day. But there's something even deeper happening here. When you pray first, you're not just programming your mind for success. You're actually engaging with spiritual forces that exist beyond the physical realm. You're tapping into what the Bible calls heavenly places, where God's plans for your day are already established, where his blessings are already prepared, where his angels are already positioned to assist you. This is why the enemy of your soul fights so hard against morning prayer. He knows that if he can get you to start your day focused on problems instead of possibilities, on limitations instead of divine potential, on your circumstances instead of God's character, he can influence the trajectory of your entire day. But when you pray first, you're essentially putting up a spiritual shield that protects your heart and mind from negative influences while opening you up to receive all the good things God has planned for you. And here's something that might blow your mind. The prayer I'm about to teach you doesn't require you to have perfect faith. It doesn't require you to feel spiritually mature or emotionally stable. It works even when you're struggling, even when you're doubting, even when you're going through the hardest season of your life. In fact, it works especially well during those times, because that's when you most need divine intervention to shift your perspective and your circumstances. This prayer is so simple that a child can pray it, yet so profound that it can revolutionize the life of someone who's been walking with God for decades. It's so universal that it works regardless of your denomination, your theological background, or your level of biblical knowledge. Yet it's so personal that God responds to it as if you're the only person on earth praying it. But I want to warn you about something. Once you start praying this prayer consistently, once you make it your non-negotiable morning routine, your life is going to start changing in ways that might surprise you. Opportunities are going to present themselves that you never saw coming. Relationships are going to improve in ways that seem almost too good to be true. Provision is going to show up from directions you weren't even looking. And people around you are going to start noticing that something is different about you, something they can't quite put their finger on, but can't deny. The reason this happens is because when you consistently position yourself in God's presence at the beginning of each day, you begin to carry His presence with you throughout the day. You become a walking invitation for miracles to manifest, not just in your own life, but in the lives of everyone you encounter. This is the power of praying first. This is why this one prayer can completely transform your daily experience. And in just a moment, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to pray it, word by word, so that starting tomorrow morning, you can begin experiencing the miraculous life that God has always intended for you to live. But before we get to the actual words of this transformative prayer, I need to share with you something that happened to me personally that opened my eyes to just how powerful this principle really is. Because until I experienced it myself, I thought I understood prayer. I thought I knew how to connect with God. But what I discovered changed everything. It was during one of the most challenging seasons of my life. I was facing what seemed like an impossible situation. Every door I tried to open slammed shut. Every solution I attempted led to another dead end. Every prayer I prayed felt like it was hitting a brick wall. I was exhausted, frustrated, and honestly beginning to wonder if God was even listening. Then one morning, something inside me whispered, "Pray first. Before you check your phone, before you think about your problems, before you rehearse your worries, just pray first." And for the first time in weeks, I didn't reach for my phone the moment I opened my eyes. Instead, I rolled over, closed my eyes again, and began to speak to heaven before I spoke to anyone or anything else. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Within hours, I received a phone call that changed everything. An opportunity I had never even considered suddenly presented itself. A door I didn't even know existed swung wide open. And the impossible situation I had been wrestling with began to resolve itself in ways I could never have orchestrated or imagined. But here's what was even more remarkable. This wasn't a one-time coincidence. As I continued to make prayer my very first activity each morning, these kinds of divine interventions became my new normal. Not every day brought dramatic breakthroughs, but every day brought evidence that heaven was actively involved in the details of my life. And that's when I realized something profound. The timing of our prayers matters more than most of us have ever understood. There's something spiritually significant about offering your first thoughts, your first words, your first moments of consciousness to God. It's like you're saying, before I engage with anything else in this world, I want to engage with you. Before I give my attention to anyone else, you get my full focus. This act of prioritizing God above everything else in those first precious moments of awareness creates what I call a spiritual momentum that carries through your entire day. It's like starting a river at the top of a mountain. That first drop of water might seem insignificant, but it determines the direction and flow of everything that follows. Now let me tell you what this prayer is not, because I want to clear up some misconceptions that might be preventing you from experiencing its full power. This is not a magic formula that automatically gives you everything you want. It's not a spiritual vending machine where you insert your requests and out pops your desired outcome. And it's definitely not a way to manipulate God into doing what you think is best for your life. Instead, this prayer is a way of aligning your heart with God's heart. It's a method of positioning yourself to receive what He already wants to give you. It's a practice that opens your spiritual eyes to recognize the miracles that are already surrounding you, but that you might be too distracted to notice. Think of it this way. God is constantly broadcasting blessings, opportunities, and divine interventions into your life. But if your spiritual receiver isn't tuned to the right frequency, you'll miss them. This morning prayer is like adjusting the antenna of your heart so that you can clearly receive everything heaven is trying to send your way. And here's something beautiful about this principle. The more consistently you practice it, the more sensitive you become to God's voice throughout your day. You start recognizing His guidance in the small decisions. You begin sensing His direction in the mundane moments. You develop what I call miracle radar, where you can spot divine interventions even when they're disguised as everyday occurrences. But let's address the elephant in the room. Some of you are thinking, this sounds great in theory, but I'm not a morning person. I can barely function when I first wake up, let alone have a meaningful conversation with God. I hear you. And I want you to know that this prayer works regardless of whether you're a natural early riser or someone who needs 3 cups of coffee to form a coherent sentence. The beauty of this prayer is that it doesn't require you to be spiritually eloquent or mentally sharp. In fact, some of the most powerful prayers happen when we're still in that drowsy, vulnerable state between sleep and full consciousness. That's when our defenses are down, our pride is quiet, and our hearts are most open to divine encounter. God doesn't need you to be polished or perfect in those first moments of your day. He just needs you to be present. He doesn't need you to have all the right words or the perfect theology. He just needs you to show up and make Him your first priority. And when you do, something supernatural begins to unfold. Now, I want to share with you 3 specific ways that this prayer will begin to transform your daily experience, because understanding these benefits will help you stay motivated to maintain this practice even when your emotions don't feel like cooperating. First, this prayer creates what I call divine expectancy in your heart. Instead of waking up dreading what the day might bring, you begin each morning with a sense of anticipation. You start expecting good things to happen. You develop a holy curiosity about how God is going to show up in your ordinary moments. And this expectancy becomes a magnet that actually attracts miraculous experiences into your life. Second, this prayer establishes spiritual authority over your day. When you begin by acknowledging God's sovereignty and inviting His involvement, you're essentially placing your entire day under His protective covering. This doesn't mean nothing difficult will ever happen, but it does mean that even the difficult things will work together for your good, because you've positioned yourself under divine oversight. Third, this prayer activates supernatural sensitivity in your spirit. You become more aware of divine appointments, more attuned to spiritual promptings, more receptive to heavenly insights. It's like upgrading your spiritual operating system so that you can process life's experiences through a divine filter rather than just a human one. But here's where many people miss the full impact of this practice. They pray the prayer once or twice, don't see immediate dramatic results, and give up. What they don't realize is that this is a cumulative practice. Each morning that you pray first, you're making a deposit in your spiritual account. Each day that you prioritize heaven's agenda over earth's demands, you're building momentum that will eventually create breakthrough in areas where you've been stuck for years. It's like compound interest for your soul. The benefits might start small and subtle, but over time they accumulate into life-changing transformation that affects every area of your existence. Your relationships become more harmonious. Your work becomes more fulfilling. Your finances begin to align with divine provision. Your health improves. Your peace deepens. Your purpose becomes clearer. And the most beautiful part is that these changes don't happen because you're striving or struggling or trying to make them happen. They occur naturally as a result of consistently positioning yourself in the flow of God's goodness through this simple but powerful morning practice. So as we prepare to dive into the actual words of this transformative prayer, I want you to make a decision right now. Not just to try this for a day or two, but to commit to making this your new morning routine for the next 30 days. Because that's how long it typically takes for a new habit to become automatic. And that's how long it usually takes to begin seeing the cumulative effects of this spiritual discipline. Are you ready to discover the prayer that can invite miracles into every single day of your life? Are you prepared to experience what happens when you make God your first priority every morning? Then let's unlock this ancient secret that has the power to revolutionize not just your mornings, but your entire existence. The prayer itself is beautifully simple, yet profoundly powerful. And I want you to understand something before we begin. This isn't about reciting perfect words or following a rigid script. This is about creating a heart connection with heaven that sets the tone for miraculous living. The specific words I'm about to share with you have been tested by countless believers across generations, refined through centuries of spiritual practice, and proven effective in unlocking divine intervention in ordinary lives. But here's what makes this prayer so extraordinary. It addresses the 4 fundamental areas where miracles are most needed in your daily experience. It covers your spiritual alignment, your relational harmony, your provision and protection, and your purpose and direction. When you pray this prayer each morning, you're essentially inviting God to superintend every aspect of your day before that day even begins. Now let me walk you through each component of this prayer, because understanding why you're praying each part will deepen its impact in your life. The first element is what I call the recognition prayer. This is where you acknowledge God's presence and sovereignty before you acknowledge anything else. You're saying, in effect, God, before I recognize my problems, I recognize your power. Before I acknowledge my limitations, I acknowledge your limitless nature. Before I focus on what's wrong, I focus on who you are. Here's how this sounds. Good morning, Lord. As I open my eyes to this new day, I recognize that you are already here. You have been watching over me through the night, and you are present with me now. I acknowledge that this day belongs to you, and I invite you to be Lord over every moment that lies ahead. Do you feel the shift that happens when you begin your day with these words? You're not starting with anxiety about your schedule. You're not beginning with worry about your responsibilities. You're launching into your day with an awareness of divine presence. And that awareness changes everything about how you perceive and respond to whatever comes your way. The second component is the surrender prayer. This is where you release control of your day and place it entirely in God's hands. Most people wake up feeling like they have to manage everything, fix everything, control everything. But this prayer acknowledges that there's someone far more capable than you who wants to orchestrate your day for maximum blessing and minimum stress. The words go like this: Lord, I surrender this day to you completely. I release my agenda and embrace yours. I let go of my plans and trust in your perfect timing. I give you permission to interrupt my schedule with divine appointments, to redirect my path toward your purposes, and to arrange circumstances for my good and your glory. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. But I have important meetings today. I have deadlines to meet. I have responsibilities that can't be ignored. And you're absolutely right. This prayer isn't about becoming irresponsible or passive. It's about inviting God to work through your responsibilities, to bless your meetings, to give you wisdom for your deadlines, and to help you fulfill your obligations with supernatural grace and effectiveness. When you surrender your day to God, you're not abandoning your duties. You're inviting divine assistance to help you fulfill them better than you ever could on your own. You're acknowledging that there's a higher intelligence than yours that can see connections you miss, orchestrate timing you can't control, and open doors you don't even know exist. The third element is the provision prayer. This is where you invite God to meet every need before you even know what those needs will be. Instead of waiting until you're in crisis mode to ask for help, you're proactively positioning yourself to receive divine provision throughout your day. Here are the words. Father, I ask you to provide for every need I will encounter today. Provide wisdom for the decisions I must make. Provide strength for the challenges I will face. Provide favor in my interactions with others. Provide resources for my responsibilities. Provide peace in moments of pressure. Provide joy in the midst of difficulties. Let your provision reach me before my need becomes desperate. This is such a powerful way to pray because you're essentially asking God to go ahead of you and prepare blessings along your path. It's like sending an advance team to set up everything you'll need before you arrive. And here's what's remarkable. When you pray this way consistently, you start noticing that what you need shows up exactly when you need it, often in ways you never expected. The fourth component is what I call the protection prayer. This covers not just physical safety, but emotional, spiritual, and relational protection as well. You're asking God to guard your heart, your mind, your words, and your interactions throughout the day. The prayer sounds like this. Lord, I ask for your protection over every area of my life today. Protect my thoughts from negativity and fear. Protect my words from causing harm or offense. Protect my emotions from being overwhelmed by circumstances. Protect my relationships from conflict and misunderstanding. Surround me with your angels, and let no weapon formed against me prosper. Now, the fifth element is the purpose prayer. This is where you ask God to use you as his instrument throughout the day. You're saying that you don't just want to receive blessings, you want to be a blessing. You don't just want to experience miracles, you want to participate in creating miracles in other people's lives. Here's how it goes. God, use me today to be a reflection of your love. Let my presence bring peace to chaotic situations. Let my words speak life into discouraged hearts. Let my actions demonstrate your kindness. Help me to be sensitive to opportunities to serve others, and give me the courage to step into those opportunities with confidence. The sixth component is the gratitude prayer. Before your day even begins, you're thanking God for blessings that haven't yet manifested. You're expressing faith that good things are coming, that his promises are true, and that his plans for you are beneficial. It sounds like this. Thank you, Lord, for the blessings you have already prepared for this day. Thank you for the people you will place in my path. Thank you for the opportunities you will provide. Thank you for the ways you will reveal your love to me. Thank you for being faithful, even when I cannot see your hand at work. And finally, the seventh element is the alignment prayer. This is where you ask God to keep your heart aligned with his throughout the day. You're acknowledging that you can start the morning with the best of intentions, but still drift away from his presence as the day gets busy and demanding. The final words are, Lord, help me to remain conscious of your presence throughout this day. When I become stressed, remind me to breathe and remember that you are in control. When I face difficult people, help me to respond with grace. When I encounter setbacks, help me to trust your bigger plan. Let my life today be a testament to your goodness and faithfulness. Now, when you put all 7 components together, This entire prayer takes less than 3 minutes to pray, but those 3 minutes can transform the next 21 hours in ways that will absolutely astound you. You're not just asking God to bless your day, you're inviting Him to orchestrate it. You're not just hoping things work out well, you're positioning yourself to cooperate with heaven's agenda for your life. But here's where most people make a critical mistake. They pray this prayer once, expect immediate dramatic results, and when they don't see fireworks and angelic visitations, they conclude that it doesn't work. What they don't understand is that miracles often come disguised as natural occurrences. They show up as perfect timing, unexpected opportunities, favorable circumstances, and divine appointments that seem like coincidences but are actually heaven's response to your morning prayer. Let me give you some examples of what miracle-infused days actually look like. You pray this prayer in the morning, and later that day, you run into exactly the right person at exactly the right time, who has exactly the information you need for a project you're working on. Coincidence? No. That's a miracle of divine appointment responding to your morning prayer. You pray this prayer and surrender your day to God, and suddenly a meeting that you were dreading turns out to be surprisingly productive and pleasant, because the person you thought would be difficult is in an unusually good mood. Coincidence? No. That's a miracle of favor responding to your request for God's protection and provision. You pray this prayer asking to be used as God's instrument, and throughout the day, 3 different people comment on how much they needed to hear exactly what you said to them. Coincidence? No, that's a miracle of divine orchestration, responding to your willingness to be used by heaven. These are the kinds of miracles that become normal when you make this prayer your daily first priority. Not the dramatic, headline-making kind of miracles, but the everyday, life-changing kind of miracles that accumulate over time to create a life that looks supernatural from the outside, but feels natural from the inside because you've learned to live in partnership with heaven. And here's something beautiful that happens as you continue this practice. You begin to develop what I call miracle eyes. Oh, you start recognizing God's hand in situations where other people see only randomness. You begin to notice patterns of blessing that others miss. You develop a supernatural awareness that allows you to spot divine intervention, even when it's subtle. But perhaps the most profound change that occurs is in your relationship with God Himself. When you begin each day in His presence, when you make Him your first conversation partner every morning, something shifts in your spiritual intimacy. Prayer stops feeling like a religious duty and starts feeling like a natural conversation with someone who knows you better than you know yourself and loves you more than you can imagine. This daily practice creates what theologians call practicing the presence of God. It's not that God becomes more present in your life. It's that you become more aware of the presence that was always there. You develop spiritual sensitivity that allows you to recognize His voice, sense His guidance, and feel His peace throughout your day. Now, I want to address something that might be concerning some of you. Maybe you're thinking, this sounds wonderful, but what about those days when I don't feel like praying? What about mornings when I'm running late, or when I'm going through a difficult season and prayer feels forced or empty? Here's the truth. The power of this prayer doesn't depend on your feelings. It works because of God's faithfulness, not your emotional state. Some of your most powerful prayer mornings will be the ones when you don't feel like praying, but you do it anyway. Those are the mornings when you're exercising pure faith, trusting in God's character rather than relying on your emotions. And on those rushed mornings when time feels short, remember that this prayer can be condensed into even shorter form without losing its effectiveness. You can simply say, "Good morning, God. This day is yours. Use me, bless me, protect me, and help me to walk in your will. Thank you for loving me. Amen." Those 30 seconds of surrender can still invite miraculous intervention into your day. The key is consistency, not perfection. God is more interested in your heart's intention than your prayer's eloquence. He responds to sincerity, not sophistication. He honors commitment, not perfect performance. And here's something that will encourage you on those difficult mornings. The very act of turning your attention to God first thing in the morning, even when you don't feel like it, is itself a miracle. It's a supernatural ability that comes from the Holy Spirit within you. The fact that you can choose to prioritize heaven over earth, divine perspective over human worry, God's agenda over your anxiety, is evidence that miraculous transformation is already at work in your life. So as you prepare to implement this life-changing practice, I want you to set realistic expectations. Don't look for dramatic signs and wonders on day one. Instead, watch for subtle shifts in your perspective, unexpected moments of peace, small but significant improvements in your relationships, and a growing sense of purpose and direction in your daily activities. Keep a simple journal of the positive things that happen each day after you pray this prayer. You'll be amazed at how quickly you begin to see patterns of blessing that you might have otherwise attributed to luck or coincidence. This awareness will strengthen your faith and motivate you to continue the practice, even on mornings when you don't feel like it. Remember, the goal isn't to become a perfect prayer warrior overnight. The goal is simply to start each day by acknowledging that there's someone bigger than you who cares about the details of your life and wants to be involved in them. When you do this consistently, you're not just changing your morning routine, you're rewiring your entire approach to living. And let me tell you something that might surprise you. This prayer doesn't just change what happens to you throughout the day, it changes who you become. Every morning that you choose to prioritize God's presence over everything else demanding your attention, you're training your spirit to recognize what truly matters. You're developing spiritual muscles that will serve you in every area of your life. Think about it like this. When you work out physically, you don't just get stronger for that one workout. You build strength that carries over into everything else you do. Carrying groceries becomes easier. Playing with your kids becomes more enjoyable. Even simple tasks like climbing stairs don't leave you winded. That's because physical exercise creates what trainers call functional strength that improves your overall quality of life. This morning prayer works the same way, but for your spirit. Every day you practice it, you're building what I call functional faith that makes every other aspect of your life work better. Your patience in traffic increases. Your wisdom in difficult conversations improves. Your peace during stressful situations deepens. Your ability to see opportunities instead of obstacles expands. But here's where it gets really interesting. As you continue this practice, you start noticing that other people are drawn to something different about you. They can't quite put their finger on what it is, but there's a peace, a confidence, a joy that seems to radiate from you, even in challenging circumstances. What they're sensing is the residual presence of your morning encounter with heaven. You see, when you spend those first precious moments of consciousness in God's presence, you don't leave that presence behind when you get out of bed. You carry it with you. It becomes like a spiritual fragrance that influences every interaction, every decision, every response throughout your day. Now, I want to share with you something that happened to a woman named Sarah who started practicing this prayer 6 months ago. She was going through what she described as the most difficult season of her adult life. Her marriage was struggling, her teenage daughter was rebellious and distant, her elderly mother had been diagnosed with dementia, and her job was causing her constant stress and anxiety. Sarah told me that she felt like she was drowning in responsibilities and couldn't see any way for her circumstances to improve. She had tried counseling, she had tried medication for her anxiety, she had tried changing her diet and exercise routine. Nothing seemed to make a lasting difference in how overwhelmed and hopeless she felt. Then someone shared this morning prayer principle with her. Sarah admitted that she was skeptical. She said, "I've been praying my whole life, and my problems haven't gone away. How is praying differently going to change anything? But she was desperate enough to try anything, so she committed to praying this prayer first thing every morning for 30 days. Here's what Sarah told me happened. The first week, she didn't notice any dramatic changes in her circumstances. Her marriage was still tense, her daughter was still difficult, her mother's condition hadn't improved, and her job was still stressful. But she did notice something subtle. She found herself handling these challenges with more patience than usual. Instead of exploding at her daughter or shutting down when her husband tried to discuss their problems, she found herself responding with a calmness that surprised everyone, including herself. By the second week, Sarah began noticing what she called little miracles. Her daughter, who hadn't had a civil conversation with her in months, suddenly started asking for advice about school and friends. A co-worker who had been particularly difficult began treating her with unexpected respect and kindness. Her mother, despite her dementia, had several clear, lucid moments where they were able to connect meaningfully. But it was in the third week that Sarah experienced what she described as a major breakthrough. She received a phone call from a company she had interviewed with months earlier. They were offering her a position with better pay, better benefits, and a much healthier work environment. She hadn't even been looking for a new job at that point, but this opportunity fell into her lap at exactly the right time. By the end of the 30 days, Sarah's entire perspective had shifted. Her circumstances hadn't completely changed, but her ability to navigate them had been transformed. Her marriage was improving because she was approaching conflicts differently. Her relationship with her daughter was healing because she was responding with wisdom instead of emotion. Even caring for her mother felt less burdensome because she had developed a deeper sense of purpose about serving her family. But here's what Sarah said was the most remarkable part of her experience. She realized that the changes hadn't happened all at once. They had occurred gradually, day by day, as a result of starting each morning in God's presence. It was like compound interest for her soul. Each day built on the previous day until the cumulative effect created a transformation that was undeniable. This is exactly what I want you to understand about this prayer. It's not a quick fix or a magic wand. It's a daily discipline that creates gradual but profound transformation over time. And the beauty of it is that you don't have to wait until your life is perfect to start experiencing its benefits. You can begin right where you are, with whatever challenges you're facing, and watch as God begins to work miracles in the midst of your mess. Now, let me address something that I know some of you are wondering about. What if you've tried prayer before and felt like God wasn't listening? What if you've gone through seasons where heaven felt silent and your requests seemed to bounce off the ceiling? I want you to know that those experiences don't disqualify you from receiving the benefits of this morning prayer practice. Sometimes God's apparent silence isn't rejection, it's preparation. Sometimes what feels like unanswered prayer is actually answered prayer that hasn't yet become visible in your circumstances. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not getting what you think you want so that God can give you something far better than you knew to ask for. This morning prayer isn't about getting God to do what you want. It's about aligning yourself with what God wants. It's about positioning yourself to receive what He's already planning to give you. It's about opening your spiritual eyes to see the miracles that are already surrounding you, but that you might be too distracted or discouraged to notice. And here's something beautiful about this practice. Even if you've been disappointed by prayer in the past, even if you've gone through seasons of spiritual dryness, even if you're not sure you believe that God still performs miracles in ordinary lives, you can still benefit from this morning routine. Because God's faithfulness doesn't depend on your faith level. His love doesn't require your perfect understanding. His power doesn't wait for your complete confidence. All He needs is your willingness to show up. All He requires is your decision to make Him your first priority each morning. All he asks for is 3 minutes of your attention before you give your attention to everything else demanding it. But I want to prepare you for something that might happen as you begin this practice. Some mornings, you might wake up and feel resistant to praying. Your mind might immediately start racing with thoughts about everything you need to accomplish that day. Your emotions might feel heavy or anxious. Your body might feel tired or stressed. In those moments, you might be tempted to skip the prayer and jump straight into your daily routine. When that happens, and it will happen, remember that those are often the mornings when this prayer is most needed and most powerful. Those are the mornings when your spirit is crying out for divine intervention, even if your mind doesn't recognize it. Those are the mornings when 3 minutes of surrendering to God can completely shift the trajectory of your entire day. On those resistant mornings, you don't have to feel spiritual or motivated to pray this prayer effectively. You just have to be obedient to the commitment you've made to yourself and to God. You can pray it mechanically, without emotion, even with doubt, and it will still work because its power comes from God's character, not your feelings. In fact, some of the most powerful testimonies I've heard have come from people who prayed this prayer during their darkest seasons, when they felt disconnected from God, when they weren't sure He was listening, when they were going through the motions more than experiencing genuine faith. They discovered that God honors our obedience even when our hearts feel distant, and often those seasons of feeling disconnected are exactly when He's doing His deepest work in our lives. Now, I want to give you some practical tips for making this morning prayer practice sustainable. First, prepare for it the night before. Put your phone in another room or at least across the room from your bed. This prevents you from automatically reaching for it the moment you wake up. Instead, your first conscious thought can be directed toward heaven rather than social media or email. Second, keep the prayer simple and conversational. Don't worry about using fancy religious language or sounding like a professional minister. God is more interested in your sincerity than your eloquence. Talk to Him like you would talk to a loving Father who cares about every detail of your life, because that's exactly who He is. Third, be patient with yourself as you develop this habit. If you miss a morning, don't let guilt prevent you from starting again the next day. If you forget to pray first and end up checking your phone before praying, don't abandon the practice altogether. Just pray as soon as you remember and commit to doing better tomorrow. Fourth, consider writing out your prayer or keeping a prayer journal. Sometimes putting your thoughts on paper can help you focus and can also serve as a record of how God responds to your requests over time. You'll be amazed at how many of your morning prayers are answered in ways you didn't expect, but that perfectly meet your needs. Fifth, don't be afraid to personalize the prayer based on your specific circumstances. If you're going through a difficult season, spend extra time asking for strength and peace. If you're facing important decisions, focus more on requesting wisdom and guidance. If you're experiencing blessings, dedicate more time to gratitude and thanksgiving. And finally, share this practice with others. When you tell someone else about your commitment to pray first every morning, you create accountability that helps you maintain the discipline. Plus, you might inspire them to start their own morning prayer routine, which multiplies the impact of this practice beyond just your own life. But let me tell you about the most important element of making this prayer effective. It's not the specific words you use, though the structure I've given you has been proven powerful by countless believers. It's not the length of time you spend, though consistency matters more than duration. It's not even the depth of your faith, though your faith will grow as you practice this discipline. The most important element is your heart posture. When you pray this prayer, you need to genuinely mean it. When you say that this day belongs to God, you need to truly surrender control when you ask Him to direct your path. You need to honestly invite His involvement when you request His blessing and protection. This isn't about going through religious motions or checking off a spiritual to-do list. This is about entering into a real relationship with a real God. who wants to be actively involved in your real life. When you approach this prayer with authentic surrender and genuine expectancy, that's when miracles stop being rare occurrences and start becoming your normal daily experience. And here's something that will encourage you as you begin this journey. Every single person who has ever experienced a miracle-filled life started exactly where you are right now. They didn't begin with perfect faith or complete understanding. They started with a simple decision to prioritize God and see what would happen. They chose to believe that heaven cares about earth, that the divine wants to intersect with the mundane, that miracles are still possible for ordinary people living ordinary lives. The difference between people who live miraculous lives and people who don't isn't their spiritual gifting or their religious background or their theological education. The difference is their willingness to consistently position themselves where miracles can find them. And that position is always the same. It's a heart that seeks God first, a spirit that surrenders control, and a life that expects divine intervention in everyday circumstances. So as we prepare to wrap up this transformative teaching, I want to issue you a challenge that could change the trajectory of your entire future. For the next 30 days, I want you to commit to praying this prayer every single morning before you do anything else. Not after you check your phone, not after you start your coffee, not after you think about your schedule. First thing, while your mind is still clear and your heart is still open. Give God those first precious moments of your consciousness every day for the next month. Surrender each day to His control before the world tries to take control of you. Invite His miraculous intervention into your ordinary moments before ordinary thinking convinces you that miracles aren't possible. And then watch what happens. Pay attention to the small shifts in your perspective. Notice the unexpected opportunities that present themselves. Observe the divine appointments that seem like coincidences. Record the moments of peace that come in stressful situations. Document the instances of favor that you can't explain through natural means. I'm convinced that if you commit to this practice wholeheartedly for 30 consecutive days, you'll experience enough evidence of God's active involvement in your life that you'll never want to start another day any other way. This prayer will transform from a morning discipline into a daily necessity, from a religious routine into a life-giving conversation with heaven. But remember, the goal isn't just to see miracles happen to you. The goal is to become someone through whom miracles happen for others. As God blesses you through this practice, as He opens doors and provides opportunities and orchestrates favor in your life, you'll find yourself in position to be a blessing to the people around you. You'll become someone who brings peace into chaotic situations because you started your day in the presence of the Prince of Peace. You'll become someone who speaks wisdom into difficult circumstances because you began your morning listening to the voice of infinite wisdom. You'll become someone who demonstrates love in challenging relationships because you started each day experiencing the love of your Heavenly Father. This is how miracles multiply. This is how heaven's influence spreads through ordinary lives into extraordinary impact. This is how one person's commitment to pray first can create ripple effects that touch families, communities, and even nations. So let me share with you what happened to a man named David, who discovered this prayer during what he called the worst year of his life. David was a successful businessman who seemed to have everything figured out from the outside. Nice house, good income, respected in his community. But privately, he was falling apart. His business was hemorrhaging money due to a partnership that had gone sour. His 20-year marriage was hanging by a thread because of the stress and his inability to communicate what he was going through. His teenage son was getting into trouble at school, and David felt like he was failing as a father. Worst of all, he was battling depression and anxiety that made it hard for him to get out of bed each morning. David told me that he would wake up every day with a crushing sense of dread Before his feet hit the floor, his mind would already be racing through all the problems waiting for him. He'd reach for his phone immediately, hoping to find some distraction, but instead he'd just see more evidence of how his world was crumbling. Emails about business problems, news that made him more anxious, social media posts that reminded him how much better everyone else's life seemed to be going. That's when his pastor shared this morning prayer principle with him. David was skeptical because he'd been raised in church and thought he knew everything there was to know about prayer. But his pastor challenged him with something that changed his perspective. He said, "David, you've been trying to pray your way out of problems. What if instead you prayed your way into partnership with the problem solver?" That simple shift in thinking opened David's mind to trying this approach. He committed to 30 days of praying this prayer before touching his phone, before thinking about his business, before rehearsing his worries. And what happened next surprised everyone, including David himself. Within the first week, David noticed that he was sleeping better. The crushing anxiety that used to wake him up at 3 in the morning began to subside. Instead of lying awake for hours, worrying about everything that could go wrong, he found himself drifting back to sleep with a sense that someone bigger than his problems was watching over his life. By the second week, his wife noticed a change in his demeanor. He wasn't snapping at her over small things. He wasn't coming home from work already defeated and exhausted. She said it was like living with a different person, someone who still faced the same challenges but wasn't being crushed by them. But it was in the third week that David experienced what he called his first clear miracle. He received a phone call from a potential investor who had heard about his business through a mutual friend. This investor not only wanted to provide the capital David needed to save his company, but he also brought expertise that helped David restructure his entire business model for long-term success. Here's what's remarkable about this story. David hadn't been networking or actively seeking investors. He hadn't sent out proposals or made presentations. This opportunity came to him completely unsolicited, at exactly the time when he needed it most, from a direction he never would have expected. But David says the real miracle wasn't the business turnaround. It was the transformation in his relationship with his family. Because he was no longer starting each day overwhelmed by anxiety, he had emotional bandwidth to actually listen to his wife's concerns and work together on solutions. Because he wasn't constantly stressed about money, he could focus on connecting with his son and addressing the underlying issues that were causing his behavioral problems. 6 months later, David's business was not only stable, but thriving. His marriage had moved from the brink of divorce to a level of intimacy and partnership they hadn't experienced in years. His son was doing better in school, and their relationship had completely transformed. But David insists that none of these external changes would have been possible without the internal change that happened through those first few minutes of each morning. He said, "I realized that I had been starting every day in crisis mode, reacting to whatever emergency seemed most urgent. But when I started beginning each day in God's presence, I began operating from a place of peace instead of panic. And when you're operating from peace, you make better decisions. You see opportunities instead of just obstacles. You respond to problems instead of just reacting to them." This is exactly what I want you to understand about the power of this prayer. It's not that God waves a magic wand and makes all your problems disappear. It's that He gives you a completely different perspective on your problems. He provides wisdom you wouldn't have had otherwise. He opens doors you wouldn't have seen. He connects you with people who can help in ways you never could have orchestrated yourself. But here's what's even more beautiful about David's story. As his life began to stabilize and improve, he didn't forget the practice that had initiated the transformation. In fact, he became even more committed to it. He realized that the morning prayer wasn't just a tool for getting through crisis. It was a lifestyle for living in continuous partnership with heaven. Now, David leads a men's group at his church where he teaches other business professionals this same principle. He's seen dozens of men transform their lives, their families, and their careers by learning to pray first. And what he's discovered is that this practice works regardless of your personality type, your professional background, or your current circumstances. Whether you're naturally optimistic or tend toward pessimism, whether you're detail-oriented or big-picture focused, whether you're going through the best season of your life or the worst, this morning prayer creates a foundation that enhances everything else you do throughout the day. But let me address something that some of you might be thinking. Maybe you're wondering if this prayer only works for people who are already believers, or if you need to have a certain level of spiritual maturity to see results. The truth is, God responds to sincere hearts regardless of their theological sophistication. I've seen this prayer transform the lives of people who were just beginning to explore faith, people who weren't even sure they believed in God, but were desperate enough to try anything. I've seen it work for lifelong Christians who had gotten stuck in religious routine and needed to rediscover the reality of God's active involvement in their daily lives. The only requirement is sincerity. God doesn't need you to have perfect doctrine or complete biblical knowledge. He doesn't require you to use fancy religious language or follow complex spiritual formulas. He just needs you to mean it when you invite him into your day. And here's something that might encourage those of you who struggle with consistency. This prayer works even when you don't pray it perfectly. Even on mornings when you're running late and can only manage a 30-second version, even when you're feeling disconnected and the words seem empty, even when you're going through the motions more than experiencing deep spiritual connection. God honors the intent of your heart more than the eloquence of your words. He responds to your decision to prioritize him even when your emotions don't cooperate. He meets you where you are, not where you think you should be. But I want to share with you something that will help you maximize the effectiveness of this prayer. It's what I call the expectancy factor. When you pray this prayer each morning, don't just recite the words and then forget about them. Throughout the day, maintain a sense of holy curiosity about how God might be answering your morning surrender. Look for divine appointments in unexpected encounters. Notice when circumstances align in ways that seem too perfect to be coincidental. Pay attention to moments when you have unusual wisdom for difficult situations. Watch for opportunities that seem to appear out of nowhere. Be alert to instances when people treat you with favor you didn't earn. This expectant awareness doesn't mean you become superstitious, seeing God's hand in every minor detail. It means you develop what I call miracle radar, a spiritual sensitivity that helps you recognize when heaven is intersecting with earth in your ordinary moments. And here's what's fascinating about developing this awareness. The more you notice God's involvement in your daily life, the more your faith grows. The more your faith grows, the more boldly you pray. The more boldly you pray, the more dramatically God responds. And the more dramatically he responds, the more others around you begin to notice that something supernatural is happening in your life. This creates what I call a miracle momentum that builds over time. Each answered prayer increases your confidence for the next prayer. Each evidence of God's favor strengthens your expectation for future favor. Each divine appointment makes you more sensitive to recognizing the next one. But perhaps the most profound benefit of this daily practice is how it changes your relationship with uncertainty. Most people live in constant anxiety about the future because they feel like they have to figure everything out, control every variable, and prepare for every possible scenario. But when you start each day by surrendering control to someone infinitely wiser than yourself, uncertainty becomes less threatening. You begin to develop what the Bible calls peace that passes understanding. It's not that you become passive or irresponsible. It's that you learn to hold your plans loosely while holding God's character tightly. You make your best decisions with the information you have, but you trust God to handle the outcomes. This shift from trying to control everything to trusting God with everything is perhaps the most liberating transformation that comes from this morning prayer practice. Instead of waking up each day feeling like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, you wake up knowing that someone who owns the world is managing the details of your life. Now let me give you a glimpse into what your life might look like after practicing this prayer consistently for several months. You'll probably notice that you handle stress differently. Situations that used to overwhelm you might still challenge you, but they won't devastate you. You'll find yourself responding to problems with curiosity instead of panic, asking, "How is God going to work through this?" instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" Your relationships will likely improve because you'll be operating from a place of inner security rather than emotional neediness. When you start each day reminded of how much God loves you, you don't need other people's approval as desperately. When you begin each morning aware of God's provision, you don't feel as threatened by other people's success. Your work life will probably become more fulfilling because you'll start seeing your job as a platform for expressing God's character rather than just a way to pay bills. You'll approach challenges with more creativity because you're tapped into divine wisdom. You'll handle difficult people with more patience because you've been reminded of how patient God is with you. Your finances might improve, not necessarily because you'll suddenly get rich, but because you'll make better decisions from a place of peace rather than fear. You'll be more generous because you'll trust that God can replace whatever you give away. You'll be less anxious about money because you'll have daily evidence that your provider is faithful. Your physical health might even benefit because chronic stress and anxiety take a tremendous toll on your body. When you learn to cast your cares on God each morning instead of carrying them all day, your nervous system gets a chance to function the way it was designed to function. But beyond all these personal benefits, something even more beautiful will begin to happen. Other people will start asking you what's different about your life. They'll notice that you have peace in chaotic situations, wisdom in difficult circumstances, and hope even during challenging seasons. And that will give you opportunities to share not just the prayer technique, but the relationship with God that makes the prayer effective. This is how revival spreads, not through dramatic events in big auditoriums, but through ordinary people living extraordinary lives because they've learned to partner with heaven in their daily routines. When your co-workers see you handle pressure differently, when your neighbors notice you have joy despite your circumstances, when your family experiences the overflow of your morning encounters with God, they become curious about the source of your transformation. And that's when you realize that this morning prayer hasn't just changed your life, it's positioned you to be an agent of change in other people's lives. The miracles you experience become testimonies that encourage others to seek their own miraculous relationship with God. So as you prepare to embark on this 30-day journey of praying first, remember that you're not just changing your morning routine. You're positioning yourself to become a conduit of heaven's influence in your family, your workplace, your community, and beyond. You're not just asking God to bless your day. You're offering your day as an instrument through which He can bless others. This is the ultimate miracle. Not just that God would intervene in your circumstances, but that He would use your transformed life to demonstrate His love and power to a world that desperately needs both. When you pray first, you're not just inviting miracles into your day. You're positioning yourself to become a miracle in someone else's day. And that kind of life, a life that serves as evidence of God's goodness and faithfulness, that's the most fulfilling existence any human being can experience. It's what we were created for. It's why this prayer works so powerfully. Because when you align your day with God's purposes from the very beginning, everything else falls into place in ways that exceed your highest expectations. But here's what I need you to understand before you close this video and move on with your day. Information without application is just entertainment. Inspiration without implementation leads to frustration. You can watch 100 videos about prayer, read dozens of books about spiritual disciplines, and attend countless seminars about faith. But none of it will change your life until you actually do something different. The power isn't in knowing about this prayer. The power is in praying it. The transformation doesn't come from understanding the principle. It comes from practicing the principle. The miracles don't happen because you believe they're possible. They happen because you position yourself where they can find you. So right now, before you click on another video or scroll to the next piece of content, I want you to make a decision. Not a casual intention or a vague commitment, but a firm decision to try this prayer for the next 30 days. Not to see if it works, but to discover how it works in your unique situation. Tomorrow morning, before you reach for your phone, before you think about your schedule, before you rehearse your worries, you're going to spend 3 minutes surrendering your day to God and inviting His miraculous intervention into your ordinary moments. And you're going to do it again the next morning and the morning after that, until it becomes as natural as breathing. Because here's what I know about you. You didn't stumble across this video by accident. You weren't randomly scrolling when this title caught your attention. Something in your spirit recognized that this message contains exactly what you need to hear right now. God orchestrated this divine appointment because He has miracles prepared for your life that can only be accessed through the kind of partnership this prayer creates. Your current circumstances, whatever they might be, are not your final destination. Your present struggles are not your permanent condition. Your past failures are not your future identity. God has good plans for you, plans that will prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. But those plans require your participation, and that participation begins with giving Him the first moments of each new day. So don't let this moment pass without making a commitment. Don't allow this inspiration to fade into just another good idea you never acted upon. Your breakthrough might be just one prayer away. Your miracle might be waiting on the other side of tomorrow morning's surrender. Your transformation might begin with the simple decision to pray first. The choice is yours. You can continue doing what you've always done and keep getting the results you've always gotten. Or you can step into the miraculous life that God has always intended for you to live by making one small but powerful change to your morning routine. What will it be? I believe with every fiber of my being that you're going to choose the miraculous life, because something inside you is already stirring, already responding to this truth. You can feel it, can't you? That sense that this is more than just another spiritual technique or religious routine. This is your invitation into a completely different way of living. And let me tell you why I'm so confident that this will work for you. It's not because you're special in some way that others aren't. It's not because you have more faith or better circumstances or a cleaner past. It's because this prayer works with the grain of how heaven operates, not against it. You're not trying to twist God's arm or manipulate divine outcomes. You're simply positioning yourself to receive what He's already eager to give. Think about it like this. Every morning, God wakes up excited about the possibilities He's prepared for your day. He's arranged appointments you don't know about yet. He's prepared solutions to problems you haven't even encountered. He's positioned people in your path who have exactly what you need, and He's equipped you with exactly what they need from you. But here's the challenge. If you start your day focused on problems instead of possibilities, on limitations instead of divine potential, on your weakness instead of His strength, you'll miss most of what He's prepared. It's like walking through a museum with your eyes closed. The masterpieces are there, the beauty is available, the wonder is waiting to be discovered, but you can't see any of it because you're not looking in the right direction. This morning prayer is like opening your eyes in that museum. Suddenly, you start noticing details you've been walking past for years. Colors become more vivid. Patterns become clearer. Beauty that was always there becomes impossible to ignore. Now, let me address something that might be creating resistance in your mind right now. Maybe you're thinking, this sounds too good to be true. If prayer really worked this way, wouldn't everyone be doing it? Wouldn't all Christians be living miraculous lives? Here's the honest answer. Most people, including most believers, never discover this principle because they've been conditioned to think of prayer as a last resort rather than a first response. They pray when they're in crisis, when they've exhausted all other options, when they're desperate enough to try anything. But they don't pray first, when their minds are clear and their hearts are open and their faith is strongest. It's like having a key to a treasure room, but only thinking to use it when you're broke. The treasure was always available, but the timing of when you access it determines how much you benefit from it. When you pray from crisis, you're asking God to fix what's already broken. When you pray first, you're inviting God to orchestrate things so they don't break in the first place. Most Christians pray defensively instead of proactively. They ask God to heal their sickness instead of asking Him to maintain their health. They beg Him to save their marriage instead of inviting Him to bless their relationship. They plead for financial help instead of requesting His guidance in their daily decisions. There's nothing wrong with crisis prayers, but there's something incredibly powerful about prevention prayers. And here's what's beautiful about starting your day with this prayer. You're not waiting until you're overwhelmed to invite God's involvement. You're not postponing His participation until you've proven you can't handle things yourself. You're beginning each day by acknowledging that partnership with heaven is not a backup plan, it's your primary strategy for living. But let me share with you what happened to a woman named Maria, who illustrates exactly why timing matters so much in prayer. Maria was a single mother working 2 jobs to support her 3 children. Every morning felt like a race against time. She'd wake up already behind schedule, rush to get the kids ready for school, grab coffee on her way to her first job, and spend the entire day feeling like she was one step away from complete disaster. Maria told me that she prayed constantly throughout the day, but her prayers were always reactive. God, help me find my keys. God, let me not be late for this meeting. God, give me patience with this difficult customer. God, help me figure out how to pay this bill. Her entire prayer life was spent asking God to fix problems that had already developed. Then Maria heard about this morning prayer principle at a women's conference. She was skeptical because she barely had time to shower in the morning, let alone add another item to her routine. But she was also exhausted from living in constant crisis mode, so she decided to try it for 1 week. The first morning, Maria set her alarm 5 minutes earlier and prayed this prayer before getting out of bed. She said it felt strange to surrender her day to God before she even knew what challenges she would face. But she did it anyway. Here's what she noticed. Her morning routine flowed more smoothly than usual. The kids got ready without their typical arguments. She found a parking space right in front of her office building, which never happened. Her boss, who was usually demanding and critical, complimented her work on a project. Small things, but they set a different tone for her entire day. By the 3rd morning, Maria was starting to see a pattern. When she prayed first, her day seemed to unfold with less friction and more favor. Traffic lights turned green as she approached them. The grocery store line she chose moved faster than the others. Her children were more cooperative with homework and bedtime routines. But it was on the 7th morning that Maria experienced what she called her miracle moment. She prayed the surrender prayer as usual, asking God to orchestrate her day for His purposes. Later that morning, she received a phone call from a company she had applied to months earlier but had never heard back from. They were offering her a position that would allow her to quit both of her current jobs, work normal hours, and still make more money than she was making working twice as hard. Maria said the timing was perfect in ways she couldn't have orchestrated herself. Her current jobs had become increasingly stressful, her childcare situation was becoming more complicated, and she had been praying for months for a way to spend more time with her kids. This opportunity solved all of those problems at once. But here's what Maria discovered was the real miracle. It wasn't just that she got a better job. It was that she had learned to start each day in partnership with heaven instead of trying to manage everything alone. Even after her circumstances improved, she continued the morning prayer practice because she realized it had transformed not just her situation, but her entire approach to living. She said, "I used to wake up every morning feeling like I was facing the day alone. Now I wake up knowing that someone infinitely wiser and more capable than me has already gone ahead to prepare good things for me to discover. It's completely changed how I think about everything." This is exactly what I want you to understand. The external changes that come from this prayer are wonderful, but the internal transformation is even more valuable. When you start each day reminded of God's presence, provision, and protection, you develop what I call confident expectancy that influences every decision you make and every response you give throughout the day. You stop approaching challenges with dread and start approaching them with curiosity. Instead of thinking, "What if this goes wrong?" you start thinking, "How is God going to work through this?" Instead of feeling like you have to have all the answers, you become comfortable knowing that you're connected to someone who does have all the answers. This shift in perspective is what creates space for miracles to manifest. When you're operating from faith instead of fear, from expectancy instead of anxiety, from partnership instead of isolation, you make different choices that lead to different outcomes. You notice opportunities you would have missed. You say yes to invitations you would have declined. You take steps you would have avoided. But here's something that might surprise you about how this prayer works. The miracles often come disguised as natural occurrences that seem perfectly logical in hindsight. You meet exactly the right person at exactly the right time. But it happens at the grocery store where you normally shop. You receive the information you need to make an important decision, but it comes through a conversation with a colleague. You find the solution to a problem you've been wrestling with, but it occurs to you while you're taking a shower. This is why many people miss the miracles in their lives. They're looking for something obviously supernatural, something that defies natural explanation, something that makes headlines. But most miracles look like perfect timing, unexpected opportunities, favorable circumstances, and divine appointments that seem like coincidences. The morning prayer doesn't change what happens to you as much as it changes your awareness of what's happening around you. You start recognizing God's hand in situations where you previously saw only randomness. You begin noticing patterns of. You develop spiritual sensitivity that allows you to spot blessing that you use to attribute to luck, divine intervention, even when it's subtle. And this awareness creates a feedback loop that increases your faith and expectancy. The more you recognize God's involvement in your daily life, the more boldly you invite His participation. The more you invite His participation, the more dramatically He responds. The more dramatically He responds, the more your confidence grows for future prayers. This is why people who practice this morning prayer consistently often report that their lives seem to get luckier over time. It's not really luck, of course. It's that they've learned to position themselves where divine favor can find them, and they've developed the spiritual eyes to recognize it when it arrives. But let me share with you something that will help you avoid one of the most common mistakes people make when they start this practice. Don't try to control how God answers your morning surrender. Don't dictate the methods He should use or the timing He should follow or the people He should involve in bringing about His purposes for your day. When you pray this prayer, you're essentially saying, "God, I trust your wisdom more than my understanding. I trust your timing more than my impatience. I trust your methods more than my preferences." That means you have to be open to receiving His blessings in forms you didn't expect, from directions you weren't looking, through people you wouldn't have chosen. Sometimes the miracle will be that the difficult conversation you were dreading goes better than you hoped. Sometimes it will be that the problem you thought was insurmountable suddenly has an obvious solution. Sometimes it will be that the person who usually annoys you says exactly what you needed to hear. And sometimes it will be that the plan you were attached to gets redirected in a way that leads to something far better than you originally envisioned. The key is to maintain what I call holy flexibility throughout your day. You make your plans and do your work and fulfill your responsibilities, but you hold everything loosely enough that God can rearrange things when His purposes require it. You stay alert to divine appointments even when they interrupt your agenda. You remain open to course corrections even when they don't make sense from your limited perspective. This flexibility isn't passive or irresponsible. It's actually the most intelligent way to live because it acknowledges that there's someone with a much bigger picture than yours who is actively working to coordinate circumstances for your benefit. When you partner with that kind of wisdom and power, your life becomes an adventure of discovering what He has prepared rather than a struggle to force your own plans to work. Now let me tell you about something remarkable that happens as you continue this practice over time. You begin to develop what I call prophetic intuition. This isn't about predicting the future or receiving supernatural visions. It's about becoming sensitive to the Holy Spirit's gentle guidance throughout your day. You might sense that you should take a different route to work and later discover that you avoided a major traffic jam. You might feel prompted to call someone you haven't talked to in months and learn that they desperately needed to hear from a friend that day. You might have an unusual urge to check on a neighbor and find out that they needed help with something they were too proud to ask for. These intuitive promptings become more frequent and more accurate as you spend more time in God's presence each morning. It's like tuning your spiritual antenna to receive His frequency more clearly. The more time you spend listening to His voice in the quiet of your morning prayer, the more easily you recognize His voice in the noise of your daily activities. But I want to address something that some of you might be wondering about. What if you pray this prayer consistently and still face significant challenges? What if you surrender your day to God and then encounter difficulties, disappointments, or even tragedies? Does that mean the prayer isn't working or that God isn't listening? Here's what you need to understand about how this prayer works. It doesn't create a force field that prevents all problems from entering your life. What it does is position you to navigate those problems with divine wisdom, supernatural strength, and unshakable peace. It ensures that even when you walk through difficult valleys, you don't walk through them alone. Sometimes the miracle isn't the absence of the storm, it's the peace you experience in the middle of it. Sometimes the divine intervention isn't the removal of the obstacle, it's the strength you receive to overcome it. Sometimes the blessing isn't getting what you wanted, it's discovering that what you thought you wanted wasn't actually what you needed. I think about Job in the Bible, a man who experienced tremendous loss despite his righteousness and faithfulness. But even in his darkest season, even when he couldn't understand why God was allowing such suffering, he maintained his trust in divine goodness. And ultimately, God restored everything Job had lost and gave him even more than he had before. Your morning prayer isn't a guarantee that nothing difficult will ever happen to you. But it is a guarantee that whatever happens, you won't face it alone. It's an assurance that even your worst days are under the supervision of someone who loves you and has the power to work all things together for your good. And here's something beautiful that often happens when people maintain this prayer practice through difficult seasons. They discover that their hardest experiences become the foundation for their greatest testimonies. The valleys they walk through in partnership with God become the very experiences that qualify them to comfort and encourage others who face similar challenges. This is part of how miracles multiply through your life. Not only does God work miracles in your circumstances, but He uses your story of His faithfulness to create faith in other people's hearts. Your testimony of how he carried you through difficulty becomes the very thing that helps someone else believe that he can carry them through their difficulty. So don't be discouraged if your first few days of praying this prayer don't produce dramatic external changes. Focus instead on the internal shifts that are happening. Notice how your perspective changes when you start the day in God's presence. Pay attention to the peace that comes from surrendering control to someone infinitely wiser than yourself. Observe how your responses to challenging situations become more graceful and wise. These internal transformations are actually the most important miracles of all, because they're the foundation upon which all other miracles are built. When your heart is aligned with heaven's heart, when your mind is renewed by divine truth, when your spirit is anchored in unshakable hope, you become the kind of person through whom God can work supernatural things. And that's when your life becomes a testimony that draws others to seek their own relationship with the miracle-working God. That's when your morning prayer practice becomes not just a personal discipline, but a ministry that touches everyone around you. That's when you realize that the greatest miracle isn't what God does for you, but what He does through you as you learn to live in daily partnership with heaven. So let me share with you what happened to a teacher named Jennifer who discovered this prayer during what she described as the most overwhelming season of her career. Jennifer had been teaching high school for 15 years, but this particular year felt different. Budget cuts had increased her class sizes to nearly 40 students per period. Administrative demands were consuming hours of time she used to spend on lesson planning. Several of her students were dealing with serious family crises that were affecting their behavior and academic performance. Jennifer told me she would wake up each morning with her stomach in knots, dreading another day of trying to manage chaos while still somehow providing meaningful education. She'd reach for her phone immediately upon waking, checking emails from parents, administrators, and colleagues, which only amplified her anxiety before she even got out of bed. Her principal, who was also a believer, noticed Jennifer's stress and suggested she try beginning each day with this surrender prayer. Jennifer's first reaction was resistance. She said, "I barely have time to shower and grab coffee before rushing to school. How can I possibly add another responsibility to my morning routine?" But her principal challenged her with a question that shifted her perspective entirely. He asked, "Jennifer, how's your current morning routine working for you? Are you arriving at school feeling prepared and peaceful, or are you already exhausted before your first class begins?" That question hit home because Jennifer realized she was starting every day from a place of defeat. By the time she walked into her classroom, she'd already absorbed so much stress and negativity that she had nothing positive to offer her students. So, Jennifer committed to setting her alarm just 5 minutes earlier and spending those moments surrendering her day to God before touching her phone or thinking about her responsibilities. She said the first morning felt awkward because she wasn't used to talking to God before her mind was fully awake. But she did it anyway. Within the first week, Jennifer noticed something remarkable. Her most challenging students seemed less combative. The administrative tasks that usually frustrated her felt more manageable. Even her commute to school seemed to flow more smoothly, with lighter traffic and better parking spots available. But it was during the second week that Jennifer experienced what she called her first clear answer to her morning prayer. She had prayed specifically for wisdom in handling a particularly difficult student who was disrupting class daily and seemed unresponsive to traditional disciplinary approaches. That very day, during lunch, Jennifer found herself in conversation with a counselor from another school who mentioned a new strategy she'd been using with similar students. The approach was something Jennifer had never heard of, but it addressed exactly the behavioral issues she was facing. When she implemented the technique the next day, the student's behavior transformed almost immediately. Jennifer said, "It wasn't just that I got helpful advice. It was the timing and the way the conversation happened naturally, without me seeking it out. I had asked God for wisdom in the morning, and by lunchtime he had provided it through a person I wouldn't normally have talked to about classroom management. As Jennifer continued the practice, she began to notice that her entire teaching environment was shifting. Students who had been apathetic about learning started showing genuine interest in her lessons. Parents who had been critical and demanding became more supportive and collaborative. Even her relationships with colleagues improved, as she found herself responding to workplace stress with patience rather than frustration. But perhaps the most significant change was in Jennifer's sense of purpose. She had been considering leaving education because she felt like she was just surviving each day rather than making a real difference. But as she started each morning by asking God to use her as his instrument, she began to see her classroom as a mission field where she could demonstrate divine love to young people who desperately needed it. 6 months later, Jennifer was not only thriving in her teaching career, but was also mentoring other educators who were struggling with similar challenges. She started a prayer group at her school where teachers could support each other through the pressures of modern education. Several of her colleagues reported that their own classroom experiences improved dramatically after they adopted the morning prayer practice. Jennifer's story illustrates something crucial about how this prayer works in professional settings. When you start your workday by surrendering it to God, you don't just become better at your job in human terms. You begin to see your work as an extension of your worship, a platform for expressing divine character in whatever sphere of influence you've been given. This shift in perspective transforms not just your performance, but your entire sense of fulfillment and purpose. Instead of dreading Monday mornings, you begin to anticipate how God might use you throughout the week. Instead of counting down the hours until quitting time, you start looking for opportunities to serve others and make a positive impact. And here's what's beautiful about this transformation. When you approach your work as a form of ministry, when you see your colleagues and customers as people God has placed in your path for divine purposes, your job performance naturally improves. You bring more creativity to problem solving because you're tapped into infinite wisdom. You handle difficult people with more grace because you've been reminded of how patient God is with you. You persist through challenges with greater resilience because you know you're not working alone. But let me address something that might be on your mind right now. Some of you work in environments that are hostile to faith expression, places where talking about God openly might create professional problems. You might be wondering if this morning prayer practice can still be effective in secular settings, where you can't be explicit about your beliefs. Here's what I want you to understand. The power of this prayer doesn't depend on your ability to evangelize your co-workers or display religious symbols in your workspace. Its effectiveness comes from the internal transformation it creates in your character, perspective, and responses to daily situations. When you start each day in God's presence, you carry that presence with you wherever you go. People may not understand why you seem unusually calm under pressure, why you treat difficult customers with extraordinary patience, or why you approach problems with such creative solutions, but they'll definitely notice the difference. In fact, some of the most powerful testimonies I've heard have come from people who work in completely secular environments, but have become known as the person others turn to for wisdom, encouragement, and problem-solving. Their morning prayer practice positioned them to be salt and light in their workplace without ever having to preach a sermon or quote a Bible verse. This is how the kingdom of heaven expands in the marketplace, the classroom, the hospital, the courtroom, and every other sphere of society. Not through religious programs or evangelistic campaigns, though those have their place, but through transformed individuals who demonstrate divine character in ordinary work environments. Your morning prayer might be completely private, but its effects will be completely public. People will see the fruit of your secret time with God, even if they never know the source of your transformation. And often, that fruit creates curiosity that leads to spiritual conversations you never could have forced or manufactured. Now, let me share with you something that happens as you continue this practice over months and years. You begin to develop what I call legacy thinking. Instead of just asking God to bless your immediate circumstances, you start praying for His purposes to be accomplished through your life in ways that will impact future generations. You begin to see your daily choices not just as personal decisions, but as investments in the lives of people you may never meet. Your morning prayer expands beyond asking for favor on your schedule to requesting wisdom for decisions that will influence your children, your community, and possibly even your nation. This expanded perspective changes everything about how you approach your day. You're not just trying to get through your to-do list efficiently. You're asking how each task, each conversation, each decision can be aligned with eternal purposes that extend far beyond your immediate circumstances. And when you live with this kind of intentionality, when your daily actions are guided by eternal values, something remarkable happens. Your ordinary life becomes extraordinary, not because of dramatic supernatural events, but because every moment is infused with divine significance. You start to understand that there are no insignificant moments when you're living in partnership with heaven. The way you treat the grocery store cashier might be exactly what that person needs to restore their faith in human kindness. The patience you show in traffic might prevent an accident that would have affected multiple families. The wisdom you offer to a struggling colleague might be the very counsel that saves their marriage. This is the ripple effect of praying first. It's not just about inviting miracles into your personal experience, though that certainly happens. It's about positioning yourself to be an agent of miraculous transformation in other people's lives through the overflow of your morning encounters with God. But I want to prepare you for something that might surprise you as you continue this practice. You'll probably find that your definition of miracle begins to expand. Things that you used to take for granted will start to fill you with wonder and gratitude. Conversations that seem ordinary to others will strike you as divinely orchestrated appointments. Solutions that appear obvious in hindsight will amaze you with their perfect timing and elegant simplicity. This isn't because you're becoming overly spiritual or losing touch with reality. It's because you're developing the spiritual eyes to see reality more clearly. You're beginning to perceive the divine fingerprints that are present in every aspect of life, but that most people miss because they're too distracted by surface appearances to notice the deeper currents of heaven's activity. The psalmist wrote, "Open my eyes, that I may see wonderful things in your law." This morning prayer opens your spiritual eyes to see wonderful things in your ordinary day. The wonderful things were always there, but you're finally positioned to recognize them. And as your awareness of God's constant involvement in your life increases, something beautiful happens to your prayer life overall. Prayer stops feeling like a religious obligation and starts feeling like ongoing conversation with someone who is deeply interested in every detail of your existence. You find yourself talking to God throughout the day, not just during your formal morning prayer time. You might whisper a quick thank you when you find a great parking spot. You might breathe a silent prayer for wisdom before entering a difficult meeting. You might offer a brief intercession for someone who seems to be having a bad day. This continuous dialogue with heaven becomes as natural as breathing. But here's what's remarkable about this ongoing prayer conversation. It doesn't make you less effective in your daily activities. It actually makes you more present and more engaged because you're processing everything through the filter of divine partnership rather than trying to manage everything through your own limited understanding. You become like someone who has a wise advisor available 24 hours a day, someone you can consult about any decision, any challenge, any opportunity. And because this advisor knows everything about your situation, cares deeply about your welfare, and has unlimited resources to help you, you can face each day with confidence rather than anxiety. This is the lifestyle that emerges from consistent morning prayer practice. It's not about becoming more religious in the traditional sense. It's about becoming more aligned with the way life was designed to be lived, in conscious partnership with your Creator, in daily dependence on divine wisdom, in constant awareness of eternal purposes being worked out through temporal circumstances. And the beautiful thing is that this lifestyle is available to anyone who chooses to prioritize those first few minutes of each day. It doesn't matter what your past looks like, or what your current circumstances are, or what your future challenges might be. The invitation to live in miraculous partnership with heaven is extended to every person who is willing to pray first. So as you prepare to begin this transformative journey tomorrow morning, let me leave you with one final thought that I hope will motivate you to persevere even when the practice feels difficult or when you don't see immediate results. Every morning that you choose to pray first, you're not just changing that particular day. You're participating in the greatest adventure possible for a human being. The adventure of discovering how much God wants to be involved in the details of your life and how dramatically your existence can change when you learn to live in conscious cooperation with heaven's purposes. This isn't just about improving your circumstances, though that will happen. This isn't just about reducing your stress, though that will occur. This isn't just about increasing your success, though that will follow. This is about discovering the reason you were created, the purpose for which you were born, the destiny that has been waiting for you to step into it through the simple act of surrendering each day to the one who gave you life in the first place. Your tomorrow morning prayer might seem like a small thing, but it could be the beginning of the greatest transformation your life has ever experienced. Are you ready to find out what God has been waiting to do through a heart that seeks Him first? The answer to that question begins tomorrow morning in those precious first moments when you open your eyes to a world full of infinite possibilities. But before we conclude today's journey together, I want to share with you one final story that will crystallize everything we've discussed and show you exactly what's possible when you commit fully to this practice. This is the story of Robert, a man who discovered this prayer at the age of 62, during what he thought would be the twilight of his productive life. Robert had recently retired after 35 years as an accountant, and he was struggling with a profound sense of purposelessness. His children were grown and living their own lives. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier. His savings were adequate for a comfortable retirement, but he felt like his best years were behind him. Robert told me that he would wake up each morning with nowhere urgent to go, nothing pressing to accomplish, and no one depending on him. What should have felt like freedom instead felt like irrelevance. He'd spend hours watching news programs that only increased his anxiety about the state of the world. He'd scroll through social media and feel disconnected from the lives of people he used to know well. He'd sit in his quiet house and wonder if this was all there was left to his story. Then Robert's grandson, who was studying theology in college, visited for a weekend and noticed his grandfather's despondency. During their conversation, this young man shared the morning prayer principle we've been exploring today. Robert's initial reaction was skepticism mixed with mild offense. He said, "Son, I've been praying longer than you've been alive. I know how to talk to God." But his grandson responded with wisdom beyond his years. He said, "Grandpa, I'm not questioning whether you know how to pray. I'm asking whether you've ever tried partnering with God to write the next chapter of your story, instead of just asking Him to bless the chapter you think is already finished." That question haunted Robert for days. He realized he had been approaching retirement as an ending rather than a beginning. He had been viewing his advanced age as a limitation rather than an accumulation of wisdom and experience that could be channeled toward divine purposes he had never considered. So Robert decided to experiment with this morning prayer, not because he expected dramatic changes, but because he was curious about what might happen if he started each day by asking God to use his remaining years for kingdom purposes rather than just personal comfort. The first morning, Robert prayed the surrender prayer we discussed, but he added something specific to his situation. He said, "God, I have more time available now than I've had in decades. I have life experience that younger people don't possess. I have resources that many people lack. Instead of just asking you to bless my retirement, I'm asking how you want to use my retirement to bless others." Within the first week, Robert noticed something interesting happening. Instead of waking up with nothing to do, he found himself waking up with ideas. Not grandiose plans to change the world, but simple promptings about ways he could serve his community. He felt drawn to volunteer at a local literacy program. He thought about offering free tax preparation services for low-income families. He wondered if his church might need help with their financial management. By the second week, Robert was acting on these promptings. He contacted the literacy center and discovered they desperately needed volunteers who could work with adult learners struggling to develop basic reading skills. He reached out to a community center and learned they had been looking for someone to teach financial literacy classes to young adults who were drowning in debt and had never learned money management principles. But it was in the third week that Robert experienced what he described as his resurrection moment. He received a phone call from a young entrepreneur who had heard about Robert's background in accounting and his volunteer work in financial education. This young man had developed an innovative app designed to help people manage their finances, but he needed someone with Robert's expertise to help structure the business model and navigate the regulatory requirements. What started as a consulting conversation evolved into a partnership that gave Robert a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just killing time in retirement. He was using his decades of experience to help launch a venture that would eventually help thousands of people achieve financial stability and freedom. But Robert says the real transformation wasn't in finding something productive to do with his time. It was in discovering that God's plans for his life weren't finished just because his career was over. His morning prayer practice had opened his eyes to see possibilities he had never considered and had positioned him to recognize divine appointments he would have missed if he had remained focused on his own limitations. Today, 3 years later, Robert leads financial workshops across his state, mentors young entrepreneurs, serves on the board of 2 non-profit organizations, and has co-authored a book about achieving financial freedom in retirement. His days are busier than they were when he was working full-time, but he's energized rather than exhausted because he knows he's living in the center of God's will for this season of his life. Robert's story illustrates something crucial about this morning prayer practice. It works regardless of your age, your circumstances, or your current season of life. Whether you're 18 or 80, whether you're just starting your career or transitioning into retirement, whether you're single or married, whether you're dealing with abundance or scarcity, this prayer positions you to discover purposes you haven't yet considered and possibilities you haven't yet explored. But here's what I find most remarkable about Robert's transformation. He didn't just change his activities. He changed his entire perspective on aging and relevance. Instead of seeing his later years as a gradual decline toward irrelevance, he began viewing them as a crescendo toward his greatest contribution. Instead of feeling like his best days were behind him, he started anticipating that his most significant impact might still be ahead of him. This shift in perspective is available to anyone at any age who learns to start each day by asking God, "How do you want to use me today?" instead of, "How can I get through today?" It's the difference between surviving your circumstances and stewarding them for divine purposes. And this brings us to something I want you to understand about the long-term impact of this morning prayer practice. As you continue surrendering your days to God over months and years, you begin to see patterns in how He orchestrates your life that you never would have noticed before. You start recognizing that experiences you thought were random or even negative were actually preparation for opportunities you couldn't have imagined at the time. The difficult boss who taught you patience becomes the foundation for your ability to handle challenging people with grace. The financial struggle that forced you to learn resourcefulness becomes the qualification for helping others navigate their own economic challenges. The health crisis that taught you to depend on God becomes the testimony that encourages someone else to trust Him in their darkest hour. This is what theologians call the providence of God. His ability to weave together all the threads of your life, even the ugly and broken ones, into a tapestry that displays His goodness and accomplishes His purposes. But you can only see this tapestry clearly when you're positioned at the right vantage point. And that vantage point is found in daily communion with the Master Weaver. Your morning prayer doesn't just invite miracles into your current day. It helps you recognize how yesterday's difficulties were preparing you for today's opportunities, and how today's experiences are preparing you for tomorrow's assignments. You begin to live with what I call narrative coherence, an awareness that your life is telling a meaningful story, not just a random collection of events. This perspective transforms how you respond to both blessings and challenges. When good things happen, you're grateful rather than entitled because you recognize them as gifts from a loving Father. When difficult things occur, you're hopeful rather than hopeless because you trust that He can use even painful experiences to prepare you for purposes you don't yet understand. But perhaps most importantly, this prayer practice positions you to finish well. Instead of just enduring whatever years you have left, you become intentional about making those years count for eternity. You start thinking about the legacy you want to leave, not just in terms of material inheritance, but in terms of spiritual impact on the people whose lives you touch. You begin asking questions like, how can my remaining years reflect God's character to my family? What wisdom have I gained that could benefit younger generations? What resources do I have that could advance His kingdom? How can my life become a testimony of His faithfulness that encourages others long after I'm gone? These are the questions that transform ordinary people into extraordinary influencers, not because they seek fame or recognition, but because they seek to be faithful stewards of whatever time, talents, and resources they've been given. Now, as we near the conclusion of our time together today, I want to address something that might be creating hesitation in your heart. Maybe you're thinking, this all sounds wonderful, but what if I try this prayer practice and nothing dramatic happens? What if my life doesn't change in ways that other people can see? What if I don't have amazing testimonies to share like the people in these stories? Let me tell you something that might surprise you. The most powerful transformations that come from this prayer practice are often the ones that no one else notices, but that change everything about how you experience life. The peace that settles over your spirit during stressful situations. The wisdom that comes to you in moments of confusion, the strength that sustains you through difficult seasons, the hope that anchors you when circumstances look discouraging. These internal miracles might not make headlines or generate social media buzz, but they're the foundation upon which all other miracles are built. When your inner life is transformed by daily communion with God, your outer life naturally begins to reflect that transformation in ways that draw others to seek the source of your peace, wisdom, strength, and hope. You might not become famous or wealthy or influential in worldly terms, but you'll become something far more valuable. You'll become a person whose very presence carries the fragrance of heaven, whose words speak life into dead situations, whose actions demonstrate that there's a better way to live than the way the world offers. And here's something beautiful about this kind of transformation. It's contagious in the best possible way. When people encounter someone who has learned to live in daily partnership with God, it awakens a hunger in their own hearts for that same kind of relationship. Your transformed life becomes a living invitation for others to discover what you've discovered. This is how revival spreads, not through programs or campaigns, but through individuals whose lives have been so changed by their relationship with God that others can't help but notice there's something different about them, something they want for themselves. So don't measure the success of your morning prayer practice by external metrics alone. Pay attention to the internal shifts that might seem small, but are actually profound. Notice how your perspective changes when you start each day reminded of God's love for you. Observe how your responses to challenging situations become more graceful and wise. Watch how your sense of purpose and direction becomes clearer over time. These are the true miracles of this practice, and they're available to every person who commits to seeking God first, regardless of their age, circumstances, or background. But let me share with you one final insight that I believe will encourage you as you embark on this journey tomorrow morning. The prayer I've taught you today isn't just a technique for improving your daily experience, though it will certainly do that. It's actually a pathway into the kind of relationship with God that He has always wanted to have with you. A relationship characterized by trust, intimacy, partnership, and mutual delight. When you begin each day in His presence, when you surrender your plans to His purposes, when you invite His involvement in your ordinary moments, you're not just changing your morning routine. You're stepping into the reason you were created, the relationship for which you were designed, the partnership that gives meaning to every aspect of your existence. This is why this prayer works so powerfully. It's not because you're following some spiritual formula or religious technique. It's because you're aligning yourself with the fundamental reality of who you are and whose you are. You're a beloved child of the Creator of the universe, designed to live in conscious cooperation with His purposes, equipped to be His representative in whatever sphere of influence you've been given. When you live from this identity, when you operate from this relationship, when you approach each day from this foundation, everything changes. Not because you've mastered some spiritual discipline, but because you've discovered your true self and your true purpose. And the miracle is this, that discovery is just a prayer away. Tomorrow morning, in those first precious moments of consciousness, you can step into the life God has always intended for you to live. You can begin experiencing the joy of divine partnership, the peace of surrendered trust, the adventure of participating in purposes larger than yourself. The only question that remains is this: will you take that step? Will you set your alarm 5 minutes earlier? Will you resist the urge to reach for your phone first thing? Will you spend those initial moments of awareness in the presence of the one who loves you more than you can imagine and has plans for you that exceed your highest expectations? I believe with every fiber of my being that you will, because something inside you is already responding to this invitation. You can feel it, can't you? That stirring in your spirit, that recognition that this is what you've been searching for without even knowing it. Your miraculous life is waiting for you tomorrow morning. The only thing standing between you and everything God wants to do through you is one simple decision, the decision to pray first. What will you choose? I'm confident I already know your answer, because you didn't find this message by accident. God orchestrated this divine appointment because He has miracles prepared for your life that can only be unlocked through the kind of partnership this prayer creates. Tomorrow morning marks the beginning of the rest of your story. And if you'll commit to making this prayer your first priority every single day, I guarantee you that the chapters still to be written will exceed anything you've experienced so far. Your breakthrough is just one prayer away. Your transformation begins with tomorrow's surrender. Your miraculous life starts the moment you decide that God's agenda is more important than your anxiety, His purpose is more valuable than your plans, His presence more essential than your phone. The prayer is simple. The practice is straightforward. The results will revolutionize everything about how you experience life. Are you ready to discover what happens when you always pray first? Your answer to that question will determine whether tomorrow is just another day or the first day of the miraculous life God has always intended for you to live. The choice, as always, is yours. But I have a feeling I know exactly what you're going to choose. Welcome to your new beginning. Welcome to your miraculous life. Welcome to the adventure of always praying first. Tomorrow morning, when that alarm sounds and your eyes flutter open to greet another day, you're going to face a choice that will determine the trajectory of everything that follows. You can reach for your phone like millions of others do, immediately flooding your consciousness with other people's emergencies, the world's chaos, and the endless stream of demands that will pull your attention in 1,000 different directions. Or you can choose something revolutionary. You can choose to make your first conscious act an invitation for heaven to orchestrate your day before earth tries to control it. I know what some of you are thinking right now. You've heard about morning routines before. You've tried meditation apps and gratitude journals and positive affirmations. Maybe you've even attempted prayer practices that felt forced or empty or disconnected from the reality of your busy life. But what I'm asking you to consider isn't just another self-help technique dressed up in spiritual language. This is about discovering a secret that transformed the lives of biblical heroes, that sustained martyrs through persecution, that gave ordinary believers the strength to change the course of history through their simple obedience to seek God first. And the beautiful thing about this secret is that it doesn't require you to be spiritually mature or biblically educated or emotionally stable. It works for the doubter and the believer, for the broken and the whole, for the beginner and the veteran. All it requires is your willingness to give God the first 3 minutes of your day before you give those minutes to anything else. But here's what I need you to understand about the magnitude of this decision. Those 3 minutes aren't just about prayer. They're about positioning. They're about declaring that there's someone more qualified than you to direct your day. They're about acknowledging that the creator of the universe is interested in the details of your Tuesday morning commute, your difficult conversation with your teenager, your presentation to the board, your struggle to make ends meet. When you pray first, you're not just talking to yourself or hoping someone is listening. You're entering into partnership with the one who knows the end from the beginning, who sees connections you miss, who can orchestrate circumstances you could never manipulate, who delights in opening doors you didn't even know existed. Think about David facing Goliath. He didn't wake up that morning planning to slay a giant. He woke up doing what he always did, seeking God first, acknowledging divine authority over his day, positioning himself as a vessel for heaven's purposes. When the moment came to step into his destiny, he was already aligned with the power source that made the impossible inevitable. Your Goliath might not be a 9-foot warrior threatening an army. It might be a financial crisis that seems insurmountable, a relationship that appears beyond repair, a health challenge that has doctors puzzled, a career decision that feels overwhelming, a family situation that keeps you awake at night. But the principle remains the same. When you start your day aligned with heaven's power, when you position yourself as a partner in God's purposes rather than a victim of your circumstances, you discover that giants aren't as intimidating as they appear from a distance. Problems that seem impossible from a human perspective become opportunities for divine intervention when viewed through the lens of morning surrender. But let me be completely honest with you about what this practice demands. It requires you to fight against every instinct that tells you to grab control immediately upon waking. It challenges you to resist the magnetic pull of your phone, the urgent demands of your schedule, the anxious thoughts that want to rehearse everything that could go wrong. In those first moments of consciousness, when your mind is most impressionable and your spirit is most receptive, you have a choice. You can fill that sacred space with worry about the day ahead, or you can fill it with worship of the one who holds your day in his hands. Most people choose worry without even realizing they're choosing. They wake up and immediately begin the mental gymnastics of trying to figure out how to manage everything on their plate. They start calculating and strategizing and stressing before their feet hit the floor. They begin their day as slaves to circumstances rather than partners with the one who controls circumstances. But when you choose to pray first, something supernatural happens in that transition between sleep and full awareness. Your spirit connects with God's spirit before your mind connects with the world's chaos. Your heart aligns with heaven's agenda before it gets hijacked by Earth's emergencies. Your faith gets activated before your fear has a chance to paralyze you. This isn't mystical thinking. This is practical wisdom that recognizes a fundamental truth about how we're designed to function. We were created for communion with our Creator. We were designed to live in conscious partnership with divine wisdom. We were made to operate from a place of spiritual security rather than emotional anxiety. When you begin each day by acknowledging this design, by positioning yourself according to this truth, by surrendering to this reality, everything else flows from that foundation. Your decisions become wiser because they're informed by infinite understanding. Your responses become more graceful because they're rooted in divine love. Your perspective becomes clearer because it's filtered through eternal truth. Now, I want to address something that might be creating resistance in your mind right now. Some of you are thinking about the logistics. How early do I need to wake up? What if I'm not a morning person? What if my spouse thinks I've joined some kind of religious cult? What if I try this and nothing happens? Here's what I want you to know about the practical aspects of this commitment. You don't need to wake up an hour earlier or completely restructure your morning routine. 3 to 5 minutes is enough to transform everything that follows. You don't need to be eloquent or theologically sophisticated. Simple, honest conversation with God is more powerful than elaborate religious language. You can pray this prayer while you're still in bed, before you open your eyes fully, in whatever position feels comfortable. You can whisper it or think it or speak it aloud. The words matter less than the heart behind them. The duration matters less than the consistency. The perfection of your prayer matters less than the sincerity of your surrender. And here's something that will encourage you if you're not naturally a morning person. This prayer actually becomes easier the more you practice it, because you're developing spiritual muscle memory. Your spirit begins to crave those first moments of divine connection. Your heart starts anticipating that sacred time of surrender. Your mind learns to find peace in releasing control rather than grasping for it. But let me tell you about the most profound shift that occurs as you make this practice a non-negotiable part of your daily routine. You begin to live with what I call supernatural expectancy. Instead of approaching each day wondering what might go wrong, you start anticipating how God might surprise you with His goodness. So here we are, beloved, at the threshold of transformation. You've heard the stories, you've learned the prayer, you've witnessed the testimonies of lives completely revolutionized by this one simple practice. But none of that matters unless you make the decision right now to step into this miraculous way of living. Tomorrow morning, when your eyes open to greet a brand new day, you have the opportunity to invite heaven into every moment that follows. Will you take it? Will you choose to pray first, to surrender your day before the world demands control, to partner with the one who holds your future in his hands? Your breakthrough is waiting in those first 3 precious minutes of tomorrow morning. Choose the miraculous life, beloved. Always pray first.